Hey everyone. Today it's my genuine pleasure to introduce Alice Wang, a Brooklyn-based artist who makes sculptures and films and installations. I first encountered Alice's work in 2012 when she invited me to visit her MFA thesis exhibition at NYU and then also visit studios in the MFA program there and give a talk there. I recall even then being genuinely impressed with the deceptive simplicity of her work. I've always stumbled over that phrase, deceptive simplicity. And what I mean by it, at least, is that it appears simple, but in fact is anything but simple. It's quite complex. This will be revealed in an email exchange that Alice and I had back then in, I think it was February 2012. Alice wrote, "I know what you mean by finding a common denominator in the subtext and making connections in the material process." So I guess I had said something about making connections in the material process and finding a common denominator in the subtext. More and more, this is Alice, more and more I feel that I'm building on existing works. And it's the conversation between the pieces that make up the thing I'm getting at. They are not necessarily standalone objects, but rather fields that embody physical emotions. The process of abstraction takes on fragmented allegorical forms that speak to one another, intersecting at sites of decomposition, diffusion, and state change. This is in the email. Think of the Turing machine, you know, the imaginary machine by the computer scientist and codebreaker Alan Turing that passes the Turing test if it can basically not be distinguished from a human. We have reached that point, right, with generative AI. Think of the Turing machine, textured vegetable protein, you know, that fake meat, concretion of rocks, electronic data storage, and the history of opium in China. I'm like, since then, this is me again, that was the email. Since then, I have been thrilled, really thrilled to witness her progress from a distance. And I was happy to learn that she had moved back to New York City recently after several years between Los Angeles and Shanghai. At least that's what it said on the gallery's website. Alice has had solo exhibitions at UCCA Dune Art Museum in Beidaihe in China, at the Vincent Price Art Museum in Los Angeles, at her gallery Capsule Shanghai, which is an interesting gallery, Human Resources in Los Angeles, Galerie Detroit in Stockholm, and the 18th Street Art Center in Santa Monica. And her work has been included in group exhibitions at the Hammer Museum in LA, Galleria Continua in Beijing, Parasite in Hong Kong, the 14th Shanghai Biennial at Power Station of Art, curated by Anton Vidokal of Eflux, the film program at Art Basel Hong Kong, various small fires, interesting gallery in Los Angeles, and K11 Art Foundation in Hong Kong, and that was curated by Venus Lau, who I guess is now a museum director in Malaysia. Interesting person. Alice has received grants. Her work has been supported by the Canada Council for the Arts and the Foundation for Contemporary Arts. She was an arts fellow at the University of Paris I at Pantheon Sorbonne and a Villa Aurora fellow in Berlin. She's going to be an artist in residence at the International Studio and Curatorial Program, often referred to as ISCP, in Brooklyn, starting in December. And next spring, she's going to present a selection of her films in the Eflux screening room in Brooklyn. So keep your eye out for that. Alice has taught sculpture, photography, film, and critical theory at NYU Shanghai, at UCLA, UC Irvine, UC Riverside, UC Santa Barbara. I guess it's just going to be, in short, yeah, you know, we'll add the rest of the UC campuses and then she'll have the waterfront completely covered. She received a BS, which stands for Bachelor of Science, not the other thing, a BS in Computer Science and International Relations from the University of Toronto, a BFA from Cal Arts, and an MFA from NYU. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Alice Wang.
Thank you, Mark, for the wonderful introduction, and I actually forgot about that email, but thank you for bringing that up. It actually is a great context for this lecture. So before I begin, I think I want to just talk a little bit about, where my head is, or my mind body is. So this is an image, you've probably seen it, it's called Blue Marble. It was taken in 1972 by the last Apollo mission, number 17. And it was the first time that humans, we saw ourselves from a third person perspective. And for me, this image is really kind of a touchstone, because I think, it's 1972, so that's maybe about 50 years ago. I'm not really good at that, but 50 years is not that long. And so for the last 50 years, I think conceptually speaking, intellectually speaking, we understand that we are on this planet. However, emotionally, even physiologically, or, we're not really in touch with that sort of reality that we are on this single planet, all of us. So that's one image. And then the other image I wanted to share before I begin is this one, which is called the pale blue dot. This was taken a few years later by the Voyager spacecraft. And it's basically what Carl Sagan called a family photo. And here you can see Earth among other planets like Venus, Mercury, Mars. So essentially the solar system. And I think in the beginning of this presentation, you won't really kind of get a sense of where this is coming from, but eventually my process will take me to this place where I'm going back to the Renaissance, to Copernicus, and to think about how did we transform from a geocentric world to a heliocentric world. I mean, that was like this 18th century or 16th century. Anyway, I still don't really live in a heliocentric world, but I really would like to do that. I think that's what I'm trying to do with my work is, kind of being aware of this as a reality, but also that we are not the center, and then kind of telescoping out into a much larger expansive field. Okay. And then the other thing is, this is being, an MFA program lecture. I think what I want to kind of focus on also is not, maybe not talk about every artwork that I've made, which is not a lot, by the way. I realize my production is quite, low over the last 10 years, maybe 60, 70 pieces, which is not a lot, but it takes time for me to make these things. But one of the things I wanted to explore is the temporality of the studio. So the rhythm of studio work, creative process, and then the temporality of the exhibition demands, presentation, which is a more professionalized sort of context, right? And what's happening inside the studio, what's happening outside the studio, it's not really, it's not the same at all. And so I'm gonna kind of toggle between, so I made this list of work with 10 years, and then I'm gonna toggle between this one, which is like my latest, the show that just finished, which is something that I've been having a lot of difficulty talking about, and then this one that was happening last year, earlier this year, and it's basically like a 10-year survey. But I always begin here with this piece. It's the only sculpture that has a title, which is an onomatopoeia. And initially when I was making it, and I sort of think of this as like, the first sculpture that I made that really made sense to me. When I was in my studio, I had a bunch of cellophane that was like crumbled up, sitting in the corner. And when you're in your studio, like sometimes the ontological status of the object is uncertain. You're like, is this garbage or is this something? And I've always been like, I always knew it was not garbage for sure, but I didn't really know what it was. And I was just sitting with it, for a few months, kind of really enjoying the sort of the crumbling and the sort of, just the folds of the cellophane and just the form, the formlessness of the form, really appreciating that. And then eventually, as I'm, working in the studio, thinking about sculpture, I was thinking that it would be really interesting to kind of make sculpture that metamorphosized over time. That's something that's always dynamic and changing and unstable and uncertain. So it's sort of really kind of expanding the depth of its uncertainty as an object. So I was very much influenced by minimalism. And just to give you some context, because I studied computer science, and it's so typical, like I was really good at math and I love chemistry. I never really thought of myself as an artist ever until I really was exposed to minimalism, post-minimalism, and then also like going back to our history, thinking about abstraction in the early 20th century, with Malevich and the Stiel, just sort of abstraction became this language that I was drawn to, and having this like mathematical mind that for me rationality and clarity of form is just it turned me on. Like my brain was like on fire. I don't know why. I still don't know. But anyway, so going back to 2013, I thought it would be really a funny thing to make a minimalist cube and then fill it with helium and air. And then in my mind, I was like, okay, eventually, been to any birthday parties, like the helium would deflate and kind of hover in the middle of the space, and then eventually just be on the ground, and then eventually crumble to the form that I was really appreciating, the formless form. So it was shown in a space in Los Angeles. The space itself, so it was in January. So LA in January has a very high temperature difference. So during the day it's like this, but at night it's a desert climate, so it sometimes drops to 30, and then so what happened was that when air heats up, it rises, and without insulation, the sculpture, when the gallery was open, was always on the ceiling, and the ceiling was perhaps, I think maybe, around this height or higher, so that, the walls weren't that high. So most people, when they visit the space, they don't know that there's another sculpture unless you go and look at the checklist. And then maybe you can look up and see it. But at night, because of cold air, it is heavy and it drops and it just kind of floated around in the gallery. And I wasn't there, but it was also a residency space. So people who lived in the institution were telling me, okay, it's moving. But then, so what was really interesting was that it had its own life. It was like its own consciousness. And that's also why I decided to no longer name my sculptures, because it was so overdetermining. I decided that this is what it was going to do, but then it told me what it wanted to do. And subsequently it was shown in Berlin, and it was in the spring, but Berlin in the spring is still like winter. And the sculpture didn't even rise, it was just kind of hovering. And then also when it was in Paris, it was in the summertime and it was raining, and the doors were open. And so there was a wind current, and so I kept on wanting to leave. So I thought, what a really, this is kind of like what Lauren was saying, like something about the context, the atmosphere that kind of determines its behavior, its being. And that really opened the door for a lot of different sort of sculptural investigations. And for me, sculpture really is a critical framework to investigate, the nature of reality, because it has, it has matter. And so then I was thinking, okay, so I'm going to work with air and different kind of gas molecules. But wouldn't it be amazing to work with gravity? Let me just make sure I have the video here. So this is a short video, and I'll just kind of talk through it. Oh. Okay. So, I mean, obviously it's pretty like lo-fi post-production, but what we did was I had a bunch of performers come and then we were at this rehearsal space with a mirror and I wanted to just kind of imagine what a world would look like if we were upside down, you know, if and also just how do you actually work with gravity so that it's visible? And so even though for me, even though the form itself is a video, for me, it's actually a sculpture, but the sculpture is, I don't have an image. Oh, you'll see the image of the installation is that it's on a television monitor. So I was thinking about it almost like a fishbowl, you know, the monitor itself is a sculptural object and what's contained within it is gravity. And this kind of goes back to, you know, my childhood, I guess. And this is something I'm still struggling with, you know, I don't know how popular Barth is these days, but his essay, Death of the Author, really had a huge impact on me because, you know, if meaning is no longer, you know, residing within the artist, it's decentered, meaning is, you know, everywhere. What is the purpose of this talk anyway? But, you know, that's something to, you know, still have to grapple with. But when I was like maybe 8 years old, my father was a theoretical physicist, he's retired now, but he was like, oh, I can make anti-gravity. I was like, what do you mean? How does that even work? And then he showed me the siphoning process where you can bring water up. I don't even remember this process, but I was like, this is crazy. You know, how do you bring something, you know, upwards without, and it was so lo-fi. It was literally some tubes and buckets of water. And so that's when I was starting to really kind of see how the world that we live in is really this magical, mysterious place filled with unknown things. And, you know, as a growing up with a scientist, I think what was interesting was that like, I think in the popular like space, science is maybe like truth and fact, but when I was growing up, science was really a storytelling tool. It's really a mythology. You think about the Big Bang, it's a story. No, like we have not proved the Big Bang, right? So to me, you know, yes, there's a lot of science in the work, but it's not, I'm not treating it like it's truth or fact. I'm just skipping a lot of stuff. Okay. This piece I want to talk about in terms of sculpture. So why I always go back to sculpture is that I think for me, you know, the possibility of form is really the domain of my profession. I guess that's how I think about it, you know. It's, you know, visual art, right? So I'm not a scientist. I'm not gonna like have any scientific breakthroughs, but I can make forms that are, you know, interesting. And so in this space, so this is Human Resources in Los Angeles. I don't know if anyone's ever been there before, but it used to be a theater, a movie theater, and so you can see these little aperture openings, which were the projection booths. And so you can sort of imagine it's a very large space. This is where the seating was, right? And then the screen would be on the other side. So the space itself was 2,000 square feet. And then you can sort of see this stuff that I made. It's not very large. They're not very big. And I wasn't interested in competing with architecture. I didn't want to sort of, you know, just go big. But of course, this piece is 750 square feet, which is pretty large. But when you actually walk into the space, it feels really empty. I guess it's hard to tell. But because there's nothing on the wall, there's nothing sort of in the sort of vertical space. But as you start to walk around the sculpture, there's almost like an aural dimension to it, like a sort of sonic matter, another field sort of occupying the, and then you're immersed in that field. The reason why I was wanting to explore this form was that the upstairs were turned into galleries, and I wanted to make a sculpture where you can experience something on, you know, from one vantage point, but then experience something else in another. And so in that sense, the sculptural object itself is unstable and dynamic and changing. So this is the view from upstairs. And so what was quite interesting for me was that there's a phenomenological experience when you're on the ground, but then when you get upstairs, you can see the object in its entirety. And so it kind of has a more sort of conceptual experience. And I don't know if you can tell what the image is, but it's basically snow. You guys are, but back in the day, there was this thing called analog television. And then if you are not tuned into a channel, it's snow. You can sort of hear that still on the radio. So in between channels. And in the 1970s, a bunch of scientists discovered that, and this is also what's so interesting about science, so like cosmic microwave background radiation. So if the Big Bang were real, we can still hear the sound, and they found the sound. And so in that sense, like a friend of mine, we were talking, they were like, it's kind of like a sound fossil. You know, it traveled, 13.8 billion years and then reached our ears and eyes. And so from this, so while I was working on this piece, and to give you a description, so there are 100,000 tiles that are hand colored or spray painted and then put together. And what I realized in this experience of making it was that chaos has a language, and it's actually very difficult to create chaos, it has its own way of sort of generating, and so to us, we look at it and it's chaotic, but there's, some other beings out there that can maybe understand, it's like language. So, yeah, right. And then eventually, well, while I was making that piece, I also made this one. So going back to this idea of metamorphosis and change, I was thinking that, so I've been working with gases and gravity, and then I was like, well, fossils are really interesting because they start out as corpse and then turn into, flesh, corpse, and then stone. And so it's almost like a ready-made sort of metamorphic matter. And what I did was I gilded gold over it. So for me, in a sense, my artistic process is sort of enacting a geological process to the whole thing, and gold for me has a different meaning, I guess. It doesn't really relate to value in terms of money, but growing up in China, I went to visit a lot of temples, and seeing like giant Buddhas with gold, like as a 5-year-old, is really kind of a traumatic experience, actually, because I'm like, oh God, these beings are larger than life, and they have this like transcendental quality that I'm walking into a completely different realm in their presence. Also, of course, in Egyptian culture and Mayan culture, gold is sort of this matter that links, or is at the threshold between the here and the elsewhere. And so for me, this piece is more like this, perhaps, otherworldly being or some kind of thing that doesn't belong here, doesn't belong on Earth. And then later on, I discovered that we don't actually know how gold was formed, which is crazy, right? I mean, we know where to find it, but they say that gold is from the explosion of supernovas. And then eventually, the solar system was formed, eventually the Earth is formed. Okay, so we're entering this new phase where what I call I started working with, making sculptures incorporating climate control technology as a way to work with matter like vapor, heat, and wind. So it's a funny, because I was like, well, how do I, work with these immaterial materials? And so I could go this here. I have this one, this is the image for the website. So this is a really funny sort of room. I didn't even realize as we were installing, after we installed it, it's like, oh wow, everything is sort of climate control technology in here, but it was like a particular theme in the work. So this piece here, I think you can see it here, is obviously a monolithic form, but what I did was I incorporated, so this is also what's really kind of strange about artist talks is I'm relaying the experience to you. So you're getting a secondhand, you're losing all the surprises, I'm sorry, and all the sort of like spontaneous moments where you're like, oh wow. But that's for me a very important process of experiencing art, that your body, your physiology, your mind is, engaged with the thing. And so now you're just engaging with my language, which is kind of, hopefully it's not boring, but it's not fast. So, surprise, the wind is here, in that hole. It's the Dyson fan. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the Dyson fan. Yeah. So I love the reactions of people, when they kind of expect something. And then also the yellow is made with beeswax, so that there's a scent to it. And then the scent is sort of circulating around the room. And so in making this sculpture, I realized that the limits of the physical limits or the visible limits of the sculpture, visible, is not bounded by its physical limits. So essentially, the sculpture, is traveling out of the room, with the wind and the scent. Yeah. And then eventually I also work with vapor. I have a little video here where you can sort of see the vapor coming out. Okay. And then, of course, as the vapor is condensation happens, the water, it turns into water, so there's a state change. I think what Mark was talking about earlier. And then, what else? Oh, and then heat. This is the funny one. So this is what it looks like from afar, but let me give you a perspective from here. And so the way that I was making it was, and so you can sort of already see, the forms are not representational, they're non-representational, and they're sort of, very basic geometric forms. And this is where, for me, post-minimalism comes in, is that, you're kind of, I'm dealing with repetition, but also sort of like these organic shapes that are maybe quite sensual, and, there's a sort of haptic quality to it. And so it's very much engaging with your body. Like the body is really the site of, to use sort of overused phrase, knowledge production. So in a sense, what I mean by that is, how do we know the world? How do we come to understand the world? Is yes, the brain, the cerebral, the intellect, the conceptual, but it's so much about the body and how the body is taking in this information. And that temporality is so different from, like I said earlier, like conceptually, yes, I understand, we're in the solar system. Conceptually, I understand there is a planet, but I emotionally, I'm not understanding that at all. Even though I've been doing this for quite a while, I think I'm gonna move on from here to talk about that. Sorry, this is another one with vapor. So a lot of, you can see sort of there's a lot of play involved, a lot of, and then the last part I'll cover and we'll kind of move on to outer space part. This is a moss piece. So before, I also made a piece with, sensitive plants. You know, when you're little, like maybe the school has some sensitive plants, you touch it and it changes. So this is quite interesting, in conjunction with these climate control technology, sculptures for me, plants sort of become another way to make sculptures. And so for me, this was like a kinetic form, Kineticism is just any kind of motion, and so whether if it's wind that's produced by a fan or the plant closing from touch, it's still moving, there's still motion. And then sometimes it's imperceptible motion, when the fossil, for example, is kind of congealing with the gold. You cannot see its metamorphic quality, but it's changing. And for me, using moss was sort of what I love about moss, especially this kind, I don't remember the type of moss, but it kind of feels like carpet. And so when you touch it, you can't touch the art. So basically, when you see it, actually some people thought it was just like astroturf or some kind of fabric. But so I really like that sort of unexpectedness. Just like how when I was like 8 and I saw like anti-gravity happening, where like just these little moments, that's for me where the art is in that engagement. And this is where minimalism comes in, is that for me, it was such a breakthrough in that, I don't know if that's something you guys talk about, but like, where is the art is really, that's an interesting question, right? Because yeah, you can say it's enclosed in the object, but sometimes that's not the case. And so minimalism is all about, the phenomenological experience of walking around the work itself, and where the artist is unfolding in real time, almost like a film, right? It's a time-based medium. And so when you're walking from one side to the other, something changes entirely, and you don't know what it is, just like how I just gave it away that there's wind coming from this monolithic object, so it's like it's building up into something, there's an accretion that's happening. Okay, all right, so this is a good place. So when I was making all these pieces, I was thinking about the statement that, I first heard it, I don't remember exactly when I heard it, but it's basically the earth is plummeting towards the sun, but missing it at the same time. So you think about it, the earth is plummeting, so we're literally plummeting towards the sun right now, but we're missing it. And that is it's a description of the gravitational pull of the sun on earth. That describes so the moon is actually falling towards us as well, but missing it. And so what I love about the statement is that it's both an apocalyptic miracle, like explosions, like, wow, we're here. But so it's, of the imaginary, right, of something that's magical, while at the same time it describes reality. It is real. We are orbiting around the sun. And so as this statement started to sort of sink in, I guess this is a good moment to talk about, oh yeah, here it is. This is Biosphere 2. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that place in Arizona where there's even like a 90s movie, a biodome. So anyway, and it was funded by this like oil tycoon from Texas. But anyway, it's a strange place. It's called Biosphere 2 because, well, we're on Biosphere 1. And it's a 3-acre glass and steel structure. And it contains, the rainforest, the ocean, the desert, all these other climates. This is its lung, actually, which is, I would describe it. Anyway, I was, quite curious about the earth, what is going on? Like, what are these elements? I feel like sometimes, has anyone been to Biosphere 2? It's kind of like a film set almost, / Disneyland, where, anyway, it's a simulation essentially of the earth. But while I was making this film, so there's a whole side of my practice that I'm not going to talk about, which is filmmaking. because it's gonna take too long. But just maybe here I can say that the rhythm of sculpture making is much faster. Like for my practice, there's stuff going on in the studio, I'm experimenting. But the rhythm of filmmaking is much longer because, well, number one, funding, I have to get the funding. Number two, I have to do a lot of research and reading and, like figure out where to go, location, so that is a much longer process that takes, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whereas the sculpture is coming in maybe a bit faster. But they fuel each other because what I'm talking about is that when we were going to Oracle, this is the town where Biosphere 2 is, I stopped by this meteor crater, what's called the meteor crater. Have you guys ever heard of that? It's a really amazing place where a giant meteor hit the earth and created a crater. And I found out that that was a crater when scientists realized that it's created from impact. Because before that, and this is so strange about science, like all of a sudden, like, oh wow, we know, like we peel back another layer, because prior to this, everybody thought volcanoes made craters. Right, so you've probably have seen volcanic craters. So this is the first time we're like, oh god, these objects are coming from the sky, creating these giant craters. It's really rather dangerous. And there's a whole, program now, multiple countries have it, where they're monitoring. And wasn't it recently that something was coming towards the earth and it course corrected? So in the gift shop, I bought a meteorite. And this was like, so 2016, 2015, floating in my studio. I didn't really know what to do with the meteorite. I just thought what a cool object. It's not from here. And then I thought about it and I was like, oh, maybe what I can do is melt the meteorite and reconstitute it and make my own sculpture, sort of kind of, going along this trajectory of, it being a metamorphic process and using metamorphic materials. And the whole process to find a foundry to melt my iron meteorite was very difficult because nobody wanted to take this, and I guess ruin their crucible. It's, very contaminated, you have unknown elements coming in. But in Los Angeles, I found one and they melted the meteorite for me, and then we used the lost wax process. And so this is sort of another theme, I guess, coming from my work, which is like creating like something that looks kind of like a totemic object, but also maybe that looks like a technology that could like be activated. So some of my influences are like, I don't know, it's gonna sound really weird, but ancient aliens and Stargate. And but the reason is actually because this is sort of another sort of side thing, is that so my dad was working on this wave, or this, yeah, it's a wave called the megawatt microwave, and it was back in the day during the Cold War. It was, the whole idea was that it was supposed to beam, it was Reagan Star Wars, beam into outer space, intercept intercontinental ballistic missiles. And so I went to visit the Plasma Science and Fusion Center at MIT and actually saw the wave, and we took some photos. These are actually the megawatt microwaves. But at the Plasma Science and Fusion Center, they showed me all these different weird looking devices that they look like set, props from these films, but they were actually using it to, either beam stuff up to, or whatever, I don't know. But it just, there's some truth to these Stargate films, I think, that scientists are definitely doing crazy, weird things. So maybe I can skip, so I'm gonna just kind of scroll all the way down to some of the other pieces that are that have this theme of, oh, here's another meteorite piece. And in some ways for me, this is almost like a portal, like something is gonna move and it's gonna turn. So here I think maybe, can sort of discuss this idea of that, the work, where the art is maybe not so much just here, but it requires your mind to kind of activate your imagination and sort of, kind of conjure the motion that it could have. And so in this flickering between the imaginary and the real, the art object sort of manifests itself in front of you and in your mind. And I think for me, that's really important, the space of imagination. And I think really why that's sort of kind of been, what's at stake for me is our imagination is the sort of possibility of thinking and imagining. Despite whatever's going on in the world, we still have our minds and we can still imagine other possibilities. And I think that's such an important thing to have. While I was teaching at NYU Shanghai, there was this moment where everything was locked down, there's protests. It was really scary because the last time there was protests was during the Tiananmen Square massacre. And that's when I was like, in my classes, I was like, we have our imaginations, we have our brain, we have our mind. We can imagine things that is not, we don't have to internalize the power structures. The occupation of power is not just physical, it's so mental. Sorry, just on another tangent, but the imagination is really important. And I think also, every time you make a work of art, you're proposing what art is. So, I think that's really exciting. You're using your imagination, you're saying, hey, I decided this is art, just like Duchamp, right? How come he gets to do that? We can do that too. So I think that's why it's so empowering to, just like, it's so strange because I realized that the topic of imagination is something that is maybe not very popular right now. Okay, so I'm just fast forwarding some stuff. Okay. So moving on to other sculptural forms. Here is a sculpture. So while I was, doing all the other things, and actually before, sorry, too many thoughts at the same time. I don't know if this is. So the temporality of the studio and the temporality of the exhibition space is not syncing up. And sometimes you kind of have to force it, right? So when you have a show, you have to be like, okay, I have these pieces that are ready. And then, here's a theme. And that was something that I was very resistant to. So all of my work, well, leading up to a certain point, I never had a title for the shows, never had a proper exhibition statement, but of course, I'm a human being the social world, and of course, the context of the art world is changing, and professionalization of it is, there are certain demands that are beyond what I'm able to exert and push back. I wanted to share a press release that I did for one of the shows, and what I really love about my gallerist is that he really kind of trusted me and didn't really, he allowed me to do the things I wanted to do. And so for the press release for this show, it was this thing right here. And if you look at it, I don't know what do you guys think it is? Anyone? Yes, very. But sometimes some people don't know that, and they're like, oh, it's an alien language or whatever. But I love that. And for me, the periodic table is such an elegant code that describes all of the universe, right? Everything is made of these elements, at least things that we know. And this really kind of opened everything up for me to sort of think about, fields and elements and the imperceptible and the invisible. And then, so from there, I think this is a good place for that. So, when you're making sculptures, you're thinking like, okay, there's some basic questions, right? Oh, just kind of another side note real quick. Part of my practice is very much influenced by my teaching. And when I taught, I always taught, I mean, that's probably this, especially for undergraduate courses, it's métier-based classes. So I'm teaching in the sculpture department, or I'm teaching in the photo department, or I'm teaching in the film department. And so each of these disciplines have its own history, its own theory, its own vocabulary, its own language. And especially if I'm teaching it to, like an undergraduate, because I was only in universities, a lot of the students are coming from different disciplines, different backgrounds, but wanting to take, sculpture one. So how do you explain sculpture, especially contemporary sculpture, to someone who's never even been to a gallery before, and have them make it, right? Have them make the sculpture. And so I had to ask these very fundamental basic questions about sculpture for many, many years, and film as well. And so I think that's why, again, like going back to the idea of like sculpture becomes like a domain from which a framework I can play around with and kind of expand on, right? If you're just, for me, that was an important framework to have, right? So, and that's where criticality comes in. This is really important. I think we have very sort of outdated understanding of criticality that is inherited from, maybe like the 60s and 70s. Criticality is, knowing where the power structures are, right? And then trying to usurp it and try to find little crevices to kind of get out of that, to break through. But, I think sometimes, certain strategies that we've inherited may not work anymore. And so for me, drawing this boundary, this domain as sculpture is very critical for me. It's like, how do I make sculpture? Because I'm in art. I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to be able to make breakthroughs in the field of science, right? So this idea of like, art becoming all these other disciplines, but it's still, art is in itself a discipline, right? Sculpture is a discipline, film is a discipline. So when I was thinking about, sculpture making, for me, the table became sort of this very interesting language that is able to sort of, become sort of an aggregating device to bring various elements to the work. And so this is a good view of it. So the way I was thinking about it, what a lovely introduction, Mark, because this is sort of like, another sort of moment where the fields come in. I totally forgot about those. Yeah, thinking in grad school, but so it has, that there are certain elements that you can probably recognize, like, okay, you can, there's here, so, this is a Crookes radiometer, and you can see it here. So this was installed in a space where there's a window. When the sun comes in and it hits directly onto the Crookes radiometer, it actually moves. And so so for me, okay, we have here air plants that don't require soil, but you do need to soak it in water, and it does do photosynthesis. And so there's already what these devices or these elements are bringing in are these fields. So there's like a thermal field of heat and solar energy and oxygen. And if you can see, oh, here it is. I was kind of using what I called the isometric space to give it sort of some kind of background. So the isometric graph paper, I don't know if you guys ever seen it, is formed by these equilateral triangles. And what's really interesting is that, Cartesian perspective is a distortion of reality, right? We don't actually see like a monocular camera. But when a designer is trying to communicate with an engineer, it has to create drawings that are one-to-one. So the isometric graph was invented as a 2.5 dimensional space that actually, that can describe and articulate, whatever object they're making. And so to me, this is sort of this interdimensional space. And what's happening with this table is that it's kind of in a way gathering fields and creating this sort of interdimensional sculptural spatial thing, kind of like the gravity video that I showed you. It's sort of bringing in this field and trying to contain it. here's another meteorite piece. And so as I'm, kind of thinking about, these larger, like the celestial objects and all these things, I think maybe I'll just kind of skip to the most recent work. Well, and just trying to be completely honest with you, I just made them. And I'm having a difficult time talking about them. For me, language is really important because, as I said, like if I were to talk about as I was making it, I would have done a disservice, right? Because I wouldn't have known it was doing all these other things. But one thing I can say is that when I was making this show, so this is a show where I had to give a title. It was called We Are Extraterrestrial. And to me, it's more like a statement. I mean, we are in outer space right now, And maybe let me just go back real quick to another piece that can contextualize this. So the statement that, oh my gosh. The statement, the Earth is plummeting towards the sun, but just missing it at the same time. It it was after I, was thinking about this statement, I was thinking, what can I do to experience the rotation of the Earth, or the revolution of the Earth? And I realized that one thing I could do is go to the Arctic and see the first sunrise of the year, because even though I might not feel the actual motion of, the Earth moving, I can sort of see it in the effects of the sun and how, in the Arctic, there's three months of darkness, and then, also the sun, that was the imagination, that was what I thought was gonna happen. This is what's really interesting, the body is an instrument, in my practice to sort of experience and feel, right? So conceptually speaking, I was like literally thinking it was gonna be pitch black. And then the first sunrise, you see the sun. And so I decided, you can look up when the sun is setting and rising each day. And so I looked it up for Svalbard, which is the northernmost sort of community north of the Arctic Circle. There are more polar bears than humans in this community. And so I planned it that I would go there maybe a few days before the sunrise, and then after the sunrise of the first sunrise. But I was really when I first got there, it was at night. So oh, it's great. The sky's pitch black, can't see anything. But then the morning comes, and then I can see the sky getting really getting bright. And I was like, wow, it's an experiment failure, because the sunrise didn't happen yet, but you can see light. And I started getting panicky, and I was like, oh my God, what am I doing here? But then I would go on these expeditions where I'm in the snowmobile, and maybe this is where I can show you. This is a whole other side of my practice, but I will show you the last iteration of it, and we'll end here. But I just want to show you what happened. So what I did was I would go to these expeditions, and then for about 3-4 hours, it would be this dawn or dusk, and in our latitude, this lighting condition is maybe 15 minutes the most, and all of a sudden it's dark, right? But this lasted 4 hours, 5 hours, and so that was such an uncanny experience. I mean, I felt like I was kind of in outer space, it was this snowy ice-scape, and that's when I really kind of, wanting to, so kind of going back to the most recent work, We Are Extraterrestrial. So what I did was I decided that I would find what the scientists call space analogs, which is, there are certain places on Earth that are like the moon or Mars. And scientists go there to study and figure out how to, work on, eventually when they go to Mars or whatever. And so I went on this these several road trips across the United States through Arizona, Utah, Idaho, and then I went to Iceland a few times and just stayed in these places where, you know, what I call extraterrestrial landscapes on Earth. And so there was this desire to sort of leave the Earth, but what was just so strange and also kind of cheesy maybe is that I really fell in love with Earth. It was so beautiful and magical, you know. So, yeah, I don't really want to leave, but so yeah, I don't really. This is a moment where I'm like, I don't know exactly what's happening, and you know, I want to be honest about it because I think it's like, you know, when you first watch a film and you're, you know, after it finishes, you're like, oh, what was that? I don't know what it is, you know, still trying to figure it out. And that's, I think, so I'll just show you some images and then I'll show you the film that I made, which is part of a series called Pyramids and Parabolas. And pyramids and parabolas are geometric forms that are kind of like technologies to commune with the universe. The first pyramid, I went to the Mayan pyramids, and why I specifically chose those was that those are the ones that you can climb up. And what was really interesting about that experience is that, you know, well, number one, I'm very afraid of heights, and there are no guardrails or anything. Realizing that a lot of times, like back in the day, the shamans would go up and sacrifice themselves. It's really not a place where you come down, you know. And it really made me realize how pyramids are these like celestial observational posts, you know. And then of course parabolas are these bowls that channel radio waves from very, very far away. But another form that I'm interested in is hexagonal forms. These are the hexagon. And what's really interesting about these is that they're formed in volcanic sites. And so, you know, if you look at it, they look like almost like art. They have this architectural feel, but if you just, you know, look up on Google, you can find these amazing structures that are just hexagonal. And the reason is what's happening is that when lava is cooled at the specific speed and temperature, it forms these shapes, just like how the beehives. What the bees are trying to do is they're trying to make circles, but the most stable form in nature is actually hexagonal, which I thought was kind of an interesting sort of like a priori, you know, kind of essence of form, you know. This is something that I use to help me explain what's going on in the studio. So there's a book called Is God a Mathematician? I don't know if anyone's heard of it. It's not bad. But the thing that I got out of it was really interesting was that a lot of times what happens with science is that so math is the language of physics. So they would use mathematical equations to describe physical reality. And so I think it was Einstein's special theory of relativity, you know, was an equation. And but from that equation, other sort of phenomenon was discovered. So for example, that equation I think is used in, I think, the stock market to calculate dividends as it's like going up and down. Like how, I mean, I don't think Einstein was thinking about that, you know? So what I mean is that, what I mean by the a priori is that, you know, it's through theoretical deduction. There's no empirical observation at all. But that equation also predicted gravitational waves, right? So how did he know this? And so here we have hexagons. All right, so I'll end with this film that I made. It's 15 minutes long, and to kind of give you some context. So this is number 3 of the pyramids and parabolas, and this one is sort of the most personal. And then the way I sort of think of it is kind of like a travel log, but it functions almost like a structuralist film in that it has sort of this sort of like, you know, this very like one track reality that's in the image, but then sort of this other track, which is the track of the mind, maybe.
It seemed like a good idea, venturing to the ends of the world, to remote space analogs here on Earth, just me and the extraterrestrial landscape. Like the rovers on Mars, I drove alone for hours across interminable distances. Aside from the occasional bird or car, there was nothing else. Mind and space blend into one, no longer certain if it's in my head or out there that produce these unshakable eerie feelings. Beyond comprehension and terrifying, the energy of these places gave me the chills. Through the moonless night, lightning storm, impenetrable fog, I continued onwards, completely lost, not unlike traversing a difficult maze. Crossing 2 flowing rivers on a super jeep with gigantic wheels that went up to my nose. We reached the volcano after a full day of driving across unpaved moon-like terrain of black rocky basalt. The sun never sets here in May. Tension in the muscles strangled my body like a straitjacket. Allergic to the almost midnight sun, my brain couldn't shut off. A very painful experience. Chemical sleep, no running water and electricity, just an oil stove and freezing temperature. I saw what the Apollo astronauts saw, slept where they slept, walked where they walked, and wondered if they were ever scared, watching their friends, fellow astronauts die, one after another, with each failed mission, going to their funerals, seeing their wives lose their husbands and children their fathers. Perhaps the scariest of it all would be to not go to the moon. I don't know why I've come here looking, or for what, or whom. Maybe escape, maybe to glance the surface of an image in an effort to find a way in, or maybe to break the momentum, to keep pace with the world ever accelerating. My effort to complement the speed of travel and change, I stand, wishing there was some category of pause that had all the lazy purpose of a holiday and all the crushing weight of an exodus. A temporary refuge from the knowledge of this deep and vast empty void that's inside all of us. The emptiness that's uncontainable and all-encompassing, alienating and lonely. Floating in an infinite abyss, I am reminded of the dark void inside of me. As a child, I was very fearful of it. It felt like the sensation of death, if I had any clue what death felt like. Endless. Seeing the moon grounds me. Something about its relentless regularity, showing up each night. If all else fails, I know it'll be around. I belong to that. If not to the people around me, at least to the moon, the sun, the universe. Even its indifference is reassuring. Its eternal disregard for worldly affairs makes me feel safe. The measures humans made up to differentiate each other are meaningless. We're all the same under the stars. I work under a sun that does not move. and on a teetering, spinning earth. I feel it, the feeling of that rotation. I feel it strongly. I often see it in dreams as well, the curvature of the earth. Because of how I am placed and where, I see the curvature of the earth in imaginary places as well. A kind of hyperborea hailing from above Scandinavia, infinite, blue, scintillating, endless archipelagos, endless planet, endless world. Extraterrestrial spaces are enclosed within the space of the earth itself. I was raised by a theoretical physicist who connected more with mathematical equations and elemental forces than with humans. I think he finds comfort in facts the way 0 is a fact, the hexagon is a fact, the sun is a fact. I can relate. Mom didn't talk about my grandfather much. Whenever she did, she'd always recount his strange habit of gathering up everyone's luggage into the living room hours before a family holiday and just sitting there, waiting with focused attention. To Mom, my grandfather's vigilant idling was very odd. I never took notice of her childhood memory and filed it away as something weird Grandpa did. One day, I was listening to True Spies, a podcast of stories on espionage, and it occurred to me that my grandfather's extreme preparedness was perhaps a habit he'd picked up from work in gearing up for a covert operation. Lao Ye was an agent for Mao. An undercover job led to his marriage to my grandmother in Hong Kong. Everyone in our lives is an asset, Mom would say. So are your parents, your family, your friends. In exchange for our time, our insight, our expertise, we gain something. I wasn't exactly sure why, but her words didn't sit well. In fact, I was quite hurt by it. Would Mom love me if I didn't have anything to offer her? Set aside the black and white mindset and put yourself in the shoes of a spy, the podcast announcer contended. What makes a good operations officer is your ability to live in the gray. My grandfather's alias was Mr. Lee, a businessman working in Hong Kong. He needed a wife to keep his cover because unmarried men his age in the 1940s appeared suspicious. He was really in clandestine operations in the military in World War II, smuggling arms and medicine for the Chinese Communist Army. He was already married to another woman back home, and they had a child, a daughter whom I vaguely remember seeing at my grandmother's funeral when I was 9 years old, but at the time had no clue who she was. No one told me until years later in my late 20s, long after my grandfather had passed away, about this family secret. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts about spies lately, trying to get closer to my mom and grandparents. I noticed that all of the undercover agents eventually left their double life once the operation was over and returned to their real life with their wives and children. After the war, my grandfather never returned to his past life. He took my grandmother to Beijing where he was stationed, and they started a new family. My grandmother didn't divorce my grandfather, even though he wasn't completely truthful to her. I've come to understand that Mom is not entirely wrong. but I'm not sure how well I do in this gray. The transactional nature of human relationships is confusing and alienating. It terrifies me. Perhaps that's why I'm so drawn to chemistry, astronomy, and math. Freed from the messiness of humans, I don't have to guess what the equations are thinking or how the elements are feeling, and live in constant doubt about my perception of the planets. There seems to be an underlying logic in the construction of the universe. Humans discovered bits and pieces of that reality and stitched them together to make sense of the world. They've been instrumentalized and made into technology by humans, but intrinsically, the natural forces and energies themselves, like gravity or electromagnetic waves, are simply physiological manifestations like me and you. I recently learned that Oliver Sacks, the late neurologist and writer, had an intense obsession with the periodic table. That's a very comforting thought. I too find the periodic table soothing. Like the DNA of the universe, it contains all of the known elements that make up the world we live in. Solid, real, tangible. An irrefutable presence, its existence itself, mapped out in codes on a grid. All I knew for sure was that they were math books. As I looked at them, their content seemed beyond the comprehension of human beings. The pages and pages of complex, impenetrable calculations might have contained the secrets of the universe, copied out of God's notebook. In my imagination, I saw the creator of the universe sitting in some distant corner of the sky, weaving a pattern of delicate lace so fine that even the faintest light would shine through it. The lace stretches out infinitely in every direction, billowing gently in the cosmic breeze. You want desperately to touch it, hold it up to the light, rub it against your cheek. And all we ask is to be able to recreate the pattern, weave it again with numbers somehow, in our own language, to make even the tiniest fragment our own, to bring it back to Earth. A wave washes over me. I surrender and let go, because I have to. I can't help it. There's nothing else I can do. In a split second, I transit into another brain state. My body feels euphoric. Intense pleasure washes over me, and I am engulfed by the wave of chemicals and electricity. Exhilarating, at peace, happy. Out of control, the ego takes a back seat. In the flow, in the moment, aware, present. Supporting the undercurrent are layers of thrilling excitement, rushes of adrenaline, energy pulsing through my body, feeling intensely like a sponge when the molecules enter the bloodstream. Rumbling growls from the subwoofer, fast beats, flashing lights. The body is compelled to move to the rhythm of the bass, seduced by the beats, sinking to the music and the crowd on the dance floor. Nervous, anxious energy returns briefly. Cloudy brain, soft body, losing control and communication, gaps in consciousness, loss of time. At the edge of knowing, the horizon of thought, feeling the sensation of entropy. I breathe and feel my shoulders relax, and the effect immediately cascades down my spine, flowing into my nervous system. The music overtakes my body again, and I feel my sweat, my breath among the other bodies, connection to the world, joy, bliss, pleasure, fun, beauty, free. Something tremendously appealing about them, but it's also filled with terror and fear. Beyond pleasure, it's the mysterious, the unknown that thrills me, a dark and shadowy realm the mind can take you through. Right before the chemicals set in, the body clings to waking consciousness barely hanging on. The body opens up in a way that only the chemical-induced brain can access. It feels unfamiliar initially, when the body finds its way. Then you're riding the waves. The body knows what to do, to get to the limit and not fall off, to push the boundaries of the human experience. I'm drawn to a certain kind of danger.